Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and today I'm joined by Richard Turner, who is the founder of Employees Health and the host of the LinkedIn Live series, Wellbeing Chats. And he is a renowned high-performance coach. It's so good to have you here, Richard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? I'm excited to have this conversation today.
I'm very, very well, thank you. And I am really, really excited to bring your voice to this region, to be honest, because obviously you're based in the UK, but you work globally. And I think this is your first podcast in the UAE, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
amazing. I think there's so much that we can learn when we start to, cross paths with people that are doing this really important work in and around health and well-being within the workplace, like in different locations, so that we can just bring it all together and learn from each other. I think is so, so important. So I'd love for us to kick off with you sharing a bit more about your personal and professional journey. What led you here?
Wow, good question. So it probably starts from being a kid, and as every story normally does. But I probably, since the age of, I don't know, 5, have been a sports person, and I've loved sport ever since kind of I could pick a hockey stick up or kick a football. Got into school and I wasn't really an academic. Didn't really enjoy that learning at that age. I wanted to play sport. I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be active. And I had both parents who both supported me in every aspect, but one which gave me a plan B, and that plan B was, you can go and be a builder. You don't need anything for that, so don't worry about your academics. And that was my dad. And so that was always there. And so then I didn't have to work that hard in my academics, because I had a plan B of going to, I'm just going to go and be a builder. I can go into college and I can learn on the job. And then he went off and lived in Thailand for 3 years, and at the perfect age, really. I was about 14, 15. And as he did that, I recognized that actually there's only one thing I really enjoy doing, and that was sport. And so I bucked my ideas up, changed my attitude, and got to college. And I probably wasn't really set for that. I got to college and studied sport development and something. Can't remember what that was. There's something. And then from there, obviously loved that. Learned a lot more about kind of sport development, psychology, coaching. And then pulled my finger up again to go, actually, I want to go to university. Partly to play more sport, because as you can tell, I love playing sport, but also to learn a little bit more about sports science, coaching, probably looking at being a sports coach at that age. But got to college, got to university, and studied sports science and coaching. And to probably my teachers and probably my whole family's dismay, or kind of, what's not the word dismay, but confusion, I got a degree. I walked away with a 2-2. And actually, for somebody who was probably on the verge of being kicked out of school at 14, 15 years old, wasn't the brightest kid in the world, learned to do that by myself and go through that, struggles with learning difficulties, and that was a huge achievement. But through that journey, I got into exercise and training in itself, and began to really enjoy that. And I recognized that to be a sports coach, I had to coach children, and I probably don't have the patience or the interest in dealing with kids. So kind of cut out sports coaching as a career, just because I didn't want to deal with kids answering back and not being interested in the thing they're trying to do. So went down the line of personal training. Actually joined another wellbeing company and delivered health checks for a couple of years, or for a year, and then went off to Australia for a year to play hockey, and to experience traveling in the world, or part of the world down under, and come back, and I qualified as a CrossFit coach whilst I was in Australia, and come back and set up my own personal training company, to help people improve their health, fitness, and overall well-being. Although at that point, well-being to me probably wasn't what well-being is to me now. And
So on that, what was well-being to you then versus what it is now?
I don't think I put so much of an emphasis on the mind part of it all.
Mm.
It was exercise, it was eating well, it was sleeping well, it was being healthy. And looking at it from that aspect, rather than actually the whole holistic. Our mind is probably the most powerful thing, the most important thing that we need to get in the right place. and actually the bit that all those behaviors have the impact on, which I think I now, after reflecting and being in this industry for nearly 10 years, has made a big impact on me. Made a big change in the way I look at things anyway. And so, yeah, so now, well, 10 years later, or 5 years later after that, I was at a gym, I left the gym and started up my own corporate company to offer the support that I was offering with a bit more education for companies, and helping them in 2019 with their health and well-being goals, more so than kind of overall well-being. Because back then in the UK, we were looking at exercise and physical health a lot more. Obviously, a year later, COVID hit, and then mental health exploded, and support around mental health exploded. And that coincided, and I know you'll ask me a couple of questions later on about this, but that coincided with 2018, just before I kind of started the business. A friend of mine who owned the first gym I trained at completed suicide. And so the two things combined have set me on a bit of a journey to psychology, understanding mental health, mindsets, and understanding emotions, and why we do the things we do. And that was a big reflective phase for me. And yeah, and 5 years down the line, I've learned a lot, working in the corporate space for people, and understanding that actually performance does come from the wellbeing behaviors we have. The energy comes from well-being, and now it's about understanding actually how people can be the best versions of themselves as a person and a professional.
Yeah, I love that journey so much. Like, there's so many different nuances to it that would have really brought new perspectives and different perspectives into the workplace as well. And it's actually quite interesting listening to you speak. We've got very similar journeys. I also have a BND in sport development and fitness. I also went to Australia and traveled. I've also been into the sports side of things. I've also had experience of the conversation, the narrative in that health and well-being space that it is around exercise and nutrition, and very much lacking in mental health and emotional well-being. So there's so much synergy in what you're saying to the path I've walked as well, which is why I really wanted to open this conversation with you in the workplace specifically, because there are a lot of like wellness people going into organizations, but they don't always come from that same level of education when it comes around health. And again, it's not necessarily from a clinical standpoint of health, but it is more about the preventative nature of health rather than the reactive nature. And I think we've got so good at in the kind of corporate space is talking about reactive health and insurance and claims. And it's like, okay, well, how could we actually prevent some of those things by looking after our teams in different ways? So there's so much I want to unpack with you. But you have just touched on something that's really important. I don't want to kind of skip over, and that was you losing your friend. So I would really like to understand, like, how has that impacted the role you play when it comes to helping others, and perhaps your own personal experience as well with when it comes to mental health?
It was a really eye-opening experience because I was one of those I would say normal, but I was a young man who had. There was a conversation around mental health. My dad suffered at points, and I knew that. And I found out later that my brother also suffered. But I probably was one of those people, and I'll be really honest, that looked at mental health as a weakness. I used to look at mental health that if you did exercise and if you looked after yourself and did all those really positive things, that you're never going to suffer from it.
Yeah.
And then this happened, and I was like, why? I kept thinking, why? Why has he not done this? He was loved by so many people. He had a good group of people around him. He was in the gym, obviously, working, training, had a purpose. So why? Yeah. And so that was my question consistently. Why? Yeah. I'm trying to understand it. And that opened my eyes up to changing my mindset and understanding actually it is something which, and then obviously moving into this space at the same time, actually understanding a lot more people do suffer from challenges to mental health. and every kind of thing, every reason and every challenge and person is very different to it, and it's not, doesn't matter what you do, it might just be a thing which can be there as a challenge.
Yeah. It's really hard to find the answer to that why, isn't it, as well? Because I think it is so unique for everyone. I haven't lost anyone to suicide. However, I've been on that side of the fence of being very, very close to ending my own life. And it was a very, very, very dark moment. And I can only really say I guess I understand why now. and I was on that side of it, you know. So for other people to understand that, that's a really hard expectation for us to have. So I think having that compassion and awareness to know that everybody's got their own unique relationship with mental health is really, really critical. And here in the UAE, I mean, we've come a long, long way when it comes to mental health stigma, but there was a time not too long ago where it was actually a criminal offence for suicide attempts and self-harm. The good news is that that's now been decriminalised, and you know, it's not punishable at all. Instead, actually now it's very much about how do we support and help these people, and you know, they get referred to professional mental health treatments and things like this. And there was I don't know if you've seen it yet, Richard, but there's a mental state of the world report that's just come out, and it showed that in the UAE, 25% of the population are stressed and struggling, and the UK it's 35%. And it's just, we've got so much more awareness that it's a thing, but I think we still struggle somehow to talk about it and to navigate it in the most efficient ways, particularly in the workplace. So I'm curious to know kind of your thoughts on that.
I think I'm going to start with, from what you're saying, when we look at mental health, and this is probably similar to you and similar to my story, is that it doesn't affect you until it affects you.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the way that people approach it and the stigma around it, is that people don't understand it until there's a reason to understand it,
Yep.
or they've been affected by it.
Yep.
And so I think that's a big challenge within the workplace, is that you have all these kind of naysayers against it, and people who say it is a weakness, and it's selfish, and all these other bits which you can hear, but it's because they don't understand it, they've not experienced it, or don't haven't had anybody else go through it to really kind of think about it in a different way.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I think that's probably one of the big kind of challenges people like the corporate space have, because there's so much stigma still, so people don't want to open up, or don't feel safe, and especially if you voiced your opinion on mental health.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And I think the link between mental health and performance is really, really important as well. Because I remember, so for me at that time, I was working at a national level. I was responsible for a lot of people across the GCC, had a lot of responsibilities, and I didn't feel like I could tell my team, let alone my partner. And it was like, it was a very lonely place to be. But at the same time, like, I was actually performing really well at work. Right. And it was behind closed doors that struggle was actually happening. So there was definitely that element of I can't speak up, not because I didn't think necessarily they would accept it, because I wasn't accepting it for myself. I felt ashamed that it's just me that's feeling this way and isn't experiencing, you know, some of these dark thoughts. And it was something that was like you said, an eye-opener, right? When you hit that kind of bottom, you know, that is enough to make you pay attention. And I think you're right that we only pay attention to it when we have to, a bit like in physical health, right? When somebody suddenly has a health scare and then we start to exercise. So I know you and I are obviously speaking from our personal experiences here. We're by no means clinical mental health experts. So it's really important that obviously our listeners are aware of that, but we are looking at it from the lens of how can we start to approach mental health, physical health, financial health, lifestyle health. How can we start to look at these elements in a way that really genuinely supports an employee? So I'd love for us to kind of continue this conversation in that direction, because that's really where you've been, you know, making such an impact with what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you look at all of the research, a lot of things that support mental health can be controlled by the actions you take and the way you look at things. So that's the behaviors. I always say behaviors and mindsets, because the behaviors you take are the things that help you create lots of different things within the way the brain works.
Yep.
But also you have to challenge your mindsets to things. If you're using terrible language, if you're looking as this use the term of victim, the victim mindset, actually maybe trying to shift that and actually change the way that you perceive things and use alternate views on the world. And consistently trying to question and change your mindset. So I think it's really important that the things we do and the way we are within our every day, and it's not just easy, right? There's a lot of different things that you have to try and navigate and experience and do to make sure that you are thriving in every aspect. But it's finding what works for you as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's a big part of the work that you do, right? Is you obviously you offer quite a few things. Actually, you do a lot of kind of wellbeing programs, high performance programs, executive coaching. And I'm really curious to know, is like, why do you think perhaps all of those things are so important? And I think we was having a conversation actually before we hit record here about, like, we do so many things, and actually I don't think that's a bad thing, because we have that picture of how it all fits together. I think sometimes it can be maybe confusing for other people to understand what you do when you don't geek out on this stuff as much as we do, but I do think it's important that all of the elements are kind of part of the conversation. So why is it so important for you to be looking at it through those different lenses?
Because a professional is a person at the start, right? And so understanding what a professional life looks like and their whole self is, when you look and it comes to the performance in and outside of work, you have to look at what that includes, what their lifestyle includes. And so understanding the behaviors, understanding those mindsets and the challenges they're faced with, and what they could be doing is really important, to understand how then actually they can implement that into the workplace and in what they're doing outside and in how they're performing at work. And so it's that whole self approach to performance. It's the whole self.
So
I think that.
So what is the whole self in your eyes?
What is the whole self? So it's a very good question. I think when I'm where to start with the answer, and the whole self is, as an individual, being able to turn up to your workplace as you is a big part of that whole self. But when you're looking after yourself and when you're looking after performance, let's talk about performance as an angle of this. You have to understand what it is that brings you happiness, energy, focus, clarity, direction, motivation, all of those things. Yeah. That does come from the workplace, but it comes from a deeper space than that. Yeah. It comes from where you're trying to go, what you're trying to achieve in your life. It comes from having a clear routine, having healthy habits in place. So you're eating well, you're doing the exercise, on whatever exercise that might be for you. You got good connections. Your social cup is full. You have a purpose. You have written down goals. All those different things for that individual coming into place helps that person stay happier and focused and well for longer. But not only does it do that, it also helps that person perform.
Yep.
I think as the workplace, that's what the CEO, the employer is looking for.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, if your employees are not delivering on what they're there for, the business isn't going to meet its objectives, is it? So I think there's a lot to be said for all of the elements that you've just spoken about, especially around like focus and clarity, because one of the issues that I do see quite often with organizations that we work with is that sometimes we can have employees that have all of those boxes ticked, but at an organizational level, perhaps some of those boxes aren't ticked. So just pulling on focus and clarity that you've mentioned, you've got multiple tasks happening, so many expectations of you. You've got phones ringing over here, you've got emails coming in over there, you've got your own projects going on, so that the focus part can be really, really tricky. But also the clarity alongside that in terms of clear roles, responsibilities, and objectives. There just seems to often be this mismatch of those things working cohesively together. So I'd love to know from your perspective, for the leaders that are listening to this, like where do they start in ensuring that they are supporting employees when it comes to things like focus and clarity?
Good question. I think, where do they start? Where they need to have clear goals from above, ideally. Like what's the company trying to achieve?
Yep.
And from there, they need to sit down with their team and go, okay, what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? What can we do? How do we achieve that? And actually listen to the team and work with the team and actually be a leader rather than an organizer. And a term boss, where you just bossing and delegating. Actually work as a group of people to sit down and go, we're trying to achieve this. This is what the company's trying to achieve. How do we get there? And as a group, you need to build that clarity and go, okay, this is what we can achieve. This is how we can achieve that. These are the roles that I can take because this works to my strengths. And this is actually how I'm going to stay focused and how I'm going to stay kind of performing. And this is how I can add to this. And then you set from that goal alignment from above, you can then set smaller, shorter actions.
Yeah.
And that creates the focus.
Yep.
That when things come in, obviously you're going to have to deal with things as they come in as well, right? You can't just ignore important emails. But once you have focus and clarity, you know what your role is, you know where you should go and what the things are, the most important things are, helps you kind of keep on top of where you're going. I remember there's a Harvard study that talks about goals, and I always use goals when it comes to motivation, is that kind of the 3% of individuals who had goals written down and defined were, I think it was like 99% more successful than the people who didn't have clear goals written down and defined.
Yeah, I've seen those studies, and I get why, and I completely understand it from a psychological point of view. But what makes me then question is, why is it that in January 1st people write down all their goals and that percentage doesn't match up with the delivery?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's not aligned to their. It's not aligned to their. It's not aligned to their overall goal, and it's maybe over realistic as well. I think, no, if you're talking about New Year's resolutions, it's trying to achieve something. They're trying to achieve the impossible with what you, against the lifestyle and behaviors you don't have.
I really like that you just said how it's not necessarily connected with their bigger picture or their bigger goal, because when you said about goals, you always connect that to motivation. But when I think about motivation and goals, I think about values and their core values, right? And I think when we bring it back to the workplace, it's like, it's great if those goals are broken down into smaller steps, which is really important because it helps us to prioritize, the distractions and everything else, which is fantastic. But I think that those values have to be in that conversation as well, right? Because then if they're a shared value within the organization, they're more likely to be self-motivated to sustain that over time. So I know you're all about performance, a lot of the coaching, specifically what you do, is around performance. And I think there is a big difference between like high achievers and high performers. I would love to know your take on that. Like what's the difference in your eyes? Is there a difference or what?
I think the difference is sustainability.
Yes.
Is actually, and this is where well-being comes into it as well, right? Work-life balance and how you're looking after yourself. That trying to differentiate the term between achievement and performance, and they're both great buzzwords. But if you look at the best, and I always reflect on sports people because of my background. If you look at the best sportsmen in the world, the Djokovic, the LeBron Jameses, the Messis, all that kind of stuff, it's sustainable long-term performance.
Yeah, exactly.
But because of that, they're also the high achievers.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's also, I can get into this forever, right? But if you look at some of the best athletes or best elite performers, that sometimes they don't need that kind of praise, and so it could be somebody which goes under the radar, but it's also one of the highest performers, highest achievers, because actually what they're doing is performing as a team as well, right? So that's how they bring that achievement in and how they bring that success in, is because actually they understand their role within all of this, and they need maybe having that star human being, the Messi or the LeBron James, but actually they're the person which supports that person and helps them succeed. And actually that's also high performance.
Yeah, definitely.
Over a long period of time.
Yeah, and that long period of time, that sustainability piece is where I think it becomes so relevant in any kind of team or achievement that we're moving towards, but particularly when it comes to business success, because I believe that employee well-being is one of the critical keys to that sustainability of the human being, the individual that is obviously working towards this mission. So I would love to know, in your experience, what are some of the improvements that you've seen when we bring employee well-being into the workplace, creating lasting change?
And can I just go back quickly to that point that you said? I mean, if we look at the burnout rates in organizations right now, they're skyrocketing, right? I think is it 41 or 51%? My ability to remember numbers in this kind of stuff is not my strength, but it's crazy the amount of people who are experiencing burnout, let alone have experienced burnout within the workplace. So it just tells you that people aren't prioritizing themselves and understanding what sustainable performance means, both from an individual standpoint, what that means for ourselves and how then we sustain that performance, but from an organizational standpoint and the expectations put onto our people. And so I think that's why that well-being part looks so great, and it is so important to that sustainable high performance. Because without that, and this is where like the sports world is very different to the professional world. Sports people are asked to do short bursts of excellence, and have big breaks, and then are asked to make sure they looked after their bodies, the whole picture, right, as a performance as an athlete. But a professional is asked to do a 7 till 7, minimal rest, 20 days worth of holiday, a weekend, and actually a weekend potentially where they could be working and stressing, and actually there's no real
recovery
space. The individual doesn't give themselves that space and the boundaries and the respect for themselves, and the employer has to do that as well for them to sustain that long-term performance.
Whose responsibility is employee well-being?
Both. Threefold. My very good friend, Jake Sanders, puts it perfectly, and I remember ever kind of since he said this. Every aspect of a professional place or a workplace has a responsibility. The organization has a role to make sure that what they're doing is sufficient for the team and the individual to thrive. They have to put on the space, they have to put on the things and create a culture where that is allowed. The team then has a responsibility for that team to succeed, and the individuals in it, and for the culture, for the organization to succeed. And so the leader and the people within that have a role. And then the individual has a responsibility to look after themselves for their team, and to be part of that team in a good way for themselves, for the team, and for the organization. So I think it has a three-pronged approach to well-being. But when it comes to personal well-being, then it's your team and your organization will giving you space to do that, and the respect to do that. But it comes from the individual to make sure they do the behaviors and do the things that they have to do for their own well-being.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that answer. I think it makes perfect sense. So what is some of the improvements that you've witnessed when perhaps all of those three come into play successfully? What are some of those results you've seen with the people you've worked with?
I think with the work I've done as a coach, one of the key things you see is better kind of, I use the word focus, and the sustainability of work for that performance, and being able to overcome challenges better. They go in with a lot more motivation and a lot more desire to succeed is probably the best word to put it. And so when they have that, they obviously perform better for the team. And when you're working with teams, I've worked with teams within groups who looked at well-being and helped them, and they've seen, so the program I deliver, we've had like a 33% improvement in health and happiness and overall energy through just delivering education and tips around what they can do to improve their well-being behaviors. But that impact had a 12% improvement on their productivity. They had a 26% improvement in their work life. Has it big?
How was you measuring those elements?
Through surveys. Because one of the things I struggle with, and I'll be completely honest with it, is that because I don't see from 1 year to the next year, and I don't have all the HR data, which is collected. I don't see the proper impact of it. So through surveys, beginning and end, it's questions around how they feel, what they're doing, all that kind of stuff, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's that's an important thing to touch on, actually, is because you, as the service provider coming in, I mean, yes, that there are ways that we can use that data and we can drill that into a more useful program for the organization if we have the HR data. But one of the things that's quite interesting that I've seen is that a lot of organizations actually don't have the data and they're not tracking it anyway. Right. And I think that's a big opportunity for the future. Because I think surveys are great. I think we can learn a lot from them. And it's a great benchmark. If we take it back to, fitness, and something simple that most people can relate to, even if let's say you're a runner or you're not, whether you can run a mile or if you can run 10, and you can use that as a benchmark to see if you're getting fitter or not, right? And you can use that same approach, right? And that's what I think surveys can do really well. And sometimes those surveys, they pull out that sentiment data, which often gets lost when we only look at absenteeism or presenteeism and things like that. So I do think the biggest opportunity is using them both together. But I do think it's important that we pay attention to the actual results, because one thing that I see, and it's a real bugbear of mine, our listeners might be aware of this already from previous episodes, but this is one of the reasons why I not moved, but it ended up evolving one of the kind of verticals of our business towards workplace well-being, was because, and I've been on the other side of the coin here, was delivering kind of the workshops, almost like one-off, going in, doing the things, often on the calendar themed days. It's mental health awareness week or stress awareness week and things like this. And as much as they have their place, they're not creating a sense of lasting change. And when we start to use that data and we start to look at that bigger picture, we can start to actually make more intelligent decisions about the programming, about the level of coaching that's needed, where are the gaps. And I just think like this is such an important part. And I think if we only focus solely on the workshop piece or only on one survey, again, we just start to perhaps move in a well-intentioned direction, but not perhaps one that's facilitating lasting change.
I as a provider, I love delivering workshops.
Yeah,
I enjoy doing it, especially in person way more than in anything else. And it's great because you can do it for a vast number of people, and people might walk away with a snippet of information.
Yep.
But do they action that information?
Yep.
Whereas if and that's where the challenge is, right? Like it's good to do, but actually, if you're looking for long-lasting change, you need to actually figure out what that looks like. And this is why I've made that shift from, like you, to coaching from a one-to-one standpoint to a group standpoint. Even with the program is done with groups and very actionable, because it actually makes long-lasting change.
Yep.
And if you're doing it to the right people, that has a massive impact on the company. So if you're working with leaders, you're working with execs, you're changing their mindsets to see how all of this makes a big impact. Yeah. Also helping them overcome some of the real challenges they're facing, both personally and professionally. And then you see a change within how the organization's run, rather than a one-off workshop, which is great as an awareness topic. And maybe for Mental Health Awareness Day, talking about mental health is key, right? And breaking down stigma. If you really want to change mental health in the workplace, comes from a culture, and it also comes from actually doing bits for people who have impact on others.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I echo that so deeply because, and that was one of the things that we found is that you can put all of these sessions on, but what's actually happening behind the scenes, people are actually completely exhausted and they're not even present when they go to those one-off workshops, and one of the things that we do with clients that we work with, one of our services, we will do a wellness assessment, an employee wellness assessment, and we will be assessing the employees in 10 different areas of wellness. And we take those results, and the organization ends up with an organizational report of how their employees are faring in certain areas. And then part of that report is we are making recommendations based on what they would need for a bit of programming, whether that be at a cultural level or whether it be at kind of an employee wellness level, and how organizations can support that. I would say like 95% of the time, the recommendations are nothing to do with the workshop pieces. It's nothing to do with teaching people how to sleep better, right? It's actually, let's put a technology blackout in from 7 till 7, like 7 at night till 7 in the morning, or it's let's actually ask our employees how they are feeling. Let's actually monitor workload and see what the reality is that's happening. Like people spending 90% of their time in meetings and only leaving 10% behind to actually get the work done. And it's so interesting to see the mindset flip often of the C-suite when they look at that information. And I'm like, we can deliver these workshops, like we're more than capable, we can deliver that for you if that's what you want, and we can have this part of a really strategic campaign. But these alone, without these things changing, are just going to really frustrate your employees further. And it's obviously every organization is different, but it's just such a common experience that we see within the organizations we work with, and it's just critical that we start to look at it from all angles.
Yeah, it really is. And like, it's not it's not it's not the individual's well-being which is the big issue. It's the pressures from work which is the issue. And so the changes need to be made from a cultural standpoint, right? As you're saying, like there's got to be bits within it. Blackouts. I love that term of actually the time away, making sure people aren't devoting all their time to their workplace. The team culture is it. Are you overrun with meetings? Do you feel behind because you don't have the time to do the work you need to do? Do you have the boundaries set in place? Are you part of a team which is supportive? And are your meetings set up in a correct way to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak and there's safety and there's support there and you feel heard? These are all work-related issues which have an impact on well-being.
Yeah.
And they're the things that make the difference.
I think there is also the reality that individuals are experiencing stuff in their personal lives and they bring that to work as well. So going back to that question, who's responsible, it is multidimensional. So we're not saying it's this or this, but we have to think about all of it and assess all of it to be able to then make informed decisions about how we're going to invest. As you know, running an employee health and well-being business and delivering coaching, you get people at very different points of the journey. You can come across HR directors and senior leaders who are very switched on to looking at the whole picture. But I would say they are much fewer and further between than perhaps the people that are trying to just put something in because they're busy and they've been told this is a project that's now landed on their lap, and they're just interested in health and wellness. So now it's on their plate, right? And actually just somebody being passionate about health and wellness does not mean you understand the organizational mechanics of it all.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is now, especially in the UK, and it might be different to where you are, but obviously I don't know exactly what that culture or what the work environment is like at the moment, because we're in a cost of living crisis and we're going through a recession. That companies aren't looking to employ someone just to change that culture and actually understand the depths of what is going on. And people don't, and like, because the cuts have been made, there's not the resources through the people they have to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now it's becoming a real challenge for people, and that's why they are well-being is for a lot of companies an additional job for a HR director or HR person or
For some,
HR team.
it is a role on its own.
Yeah, it needs to. Yeah, but it's not just well-being from a personal standpoint. It's like it's probably more of a cultural role.
Yeah.
What does kind of well-being mean? Where it's the way the work is run, and actually maybe changing that language around that
Yeah.
is potentially a better thing, right?
I think, yeah, I think it's for the well-being role to be done well, somebody needs to lead it, but everybody needs to be involved in it. Because like we said at the very beginning, there has to be a very clear objective and goal. It doesn't have to be like, you know, a chief wellbeing officer. It can be, you know, Jane that works in marketing, if she's got the background and the skill set to be able to do it, but somebody needs to take responsibility and lead it. And this is something that we're seeing drop massively. And when there perhaps are not the right people or enough people in those roles leading it, that's when it gets kicked to the curb the minute a recession happens, because there's nobody, like almost like fighting its corner. If you look at investing generally, you want to invest when it's cheaper, right? You want to invest when the market is low, because you know that upside is coming. And this is exactly the same in employee well-being. During a recession is the time to invest in it, not the
Yeah.
time to be like, you know, cutting the purse strings.
No, because people are struggling, right? People are struggling with workloads, their own personal well-being, all those kind of financial stresses. So being able to give them that support means they're going to be able to turn up better and perform better sustainably for a longer period of time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
So
yeah, it's such an interesting topic where it's more than just a workshop. It's more than just it's like people always ask me, well, they talk about well-being, but it's two sections, isn't it? It's personal well-being and behaviors and how we look after ourselves, and then it's work
yeah, exactly.
well-being of work, what positive well-being of work looks like, and it's more like what's a positive workplace look like for
Exactly.
people to then perform at their best.
Exactly. And the reason I brought this topic up with you specifically as well is because often it's surprising when people come from the similar backgrounds that we have, is that we're people that we are advocates for these workshops, for this education. We want everybody to know it. We want everyone to understand what they should be eating. We want everyone to understand how they can move their bodies in a way that makes sense for their lifestyle. You know, we want people to understand sleep hygiene and the impact that has on your cognitive performance. We want to be singing that from the rooftops. But even we're saying that is like the nice stuff that comes a bit later when we start to look at organizations and workplaces.
Yeah, I have a question for you. What do you think the most? And looking at it from a well-being standpoint, what do you think the most important angle? And you could probably spin this back on me afterwards. But with all the research you've gathered and all the data and stuff, where do you think the most impact's being had within a workplace?
Within that workplace well-being space, like when you just differentiated them into the two, I see that as workplace well-being and employee wellness, right? So I think they work, if you imagine like an infinity sign, I think is a consistent well-working ecosystem. So I don't think there's just like one angle. I think all of those things need to be happening in sync as much as possible. And I think the biggest impact is going to be when a company actually looks at their specific unique situation and then prioritize from there. For some organizations, that might be working on a clear vision, a mission, and values, and realigning that or upgrading or reconnecting to that. That might be their biggest impact and biggest win. But for another organization, it might be that they need to improve their reporting lines in their organizational hierarchy so that clear roles and responsibilities can be defined, so employees are not confused or stressed or worried about having conversations with this person over here because they're not sure if they should be asking that person for an approval or this person for an approval, you know. So there's I would say it's so unique based on the organization and where they are to be able to just pick like the biggest impact. But I think we need to be looking at the root cause. And in all my work ever since I was 16 years old, moving into this health and wellness space, the biggest thing I've been most passionate about is creating lasting change and getting to the root cause of an issue. Even back in the day when I was a personal trainer starting out my career, somebody will come because they wanted to lose weight. You know, most people be asking, what do you want to lose weight for? If there's a wedding or whatever, right? And we're thinking about the goal, which is great. But I would always be the one asking, well, what's brought us to this point? Why are we at this point where you're feeling the need to lose weight? I've always been obsessed with this idea of we need to get to the root cause of the problem. And for us to do that when it comes to employee well-being and workplace well-being is we need to start looking at it all together to see the impacts. So another example here is we had one of those employee wellness assessments comes back saying actually that their financial fitness was great, but their social connection was really low. And we're like, okay, cool. Well, they approached us initially to see if we had somebody that could come and deliver some financial well-being coaching, right? And I'm like, okay, so why would we invest in that if actually social connection is an all-time low? Let's actually ask the questions and let's meet with your teams and understand why is social connection so low, right? And it was two-pronged. It was one because of disconnection to the organization's vision. Somebody had been in the organization for about a year and still didn't really understand what the organization did, right? So, and then on top of the extra workload, they were also not having time to spend with their loved ones, right? So of course social connection is low. So what can we do now? We know this. What can we do? What do we prescribe? What do we recommend? How can we work together now to find a way forward? So I don't think that was a very clear answer to your question, but that you've got me kind of going off on a rant now. But it's I think it's understanding that infinity relationship that's happening all of the time, and then going for your highest priority, your lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, I like that infinity concept. I also like the fact what you pointed out is actually understanding your data.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
probably your impact. Understand what you need to do,
Yep.
but the deeps and depths of it. It could be as we've spoken about, like the workplace, actually what the work is doing to your people.
Mm.
You made a really good example there around financial well-being, and actually of something else. You might have this goal of I want to do this because this is what maybe I've struggled with as a human HR director.
Mm.
But actually, what are people wanting? What's the actual problem?
Yeah.
Go after the problem.
Yep.
Um, and
Exactly.
I see one of the things I see all the time, and I mean, part of why I'm in my industry now, I'm focused towards coaching, is leaders need a lot of help.
Yeah.
Leaders need a lot of support because they're the people which create the culture,
Yep.
and also under a lot of stress. And are
Well,
the ones which potentially, because then they're fighting fires from above and below consistently,
yeah.
that they're the ones also needing a lot of help to deliver what's being asked from both. And so yeah, that's my little bit. But I think yeah, you want to smash it.
I agree with you completely, and I definitely believe that it starts with education, and that at every level, but leadership it's really important because, and I remember when I was in my most senior position here in the UAE, was that going back to what I said earlier is that I couldn't speak up. I couldn't say like I'm not handling this. I couldn't do that. I literally, because I couldn't articulate it for myself, let alone starting to think about saying it to somebody else. I couldn't even say that to myself because I would be a failure. That was the narrative in my own mind. And there is this expectation that, leaders are put on a pedestal, is like they have all the answers. They're the boss. That's why they get paid the big bucks. And actually it takes an awful lot then for a leader to be vulnerable and say, yeah, I don't understand this. I'm not sure where to go, where to start. And I think that is the most powerful move. And one of the reasons we ended up in the workplace wellbeing space was because through our coaching work. So the coaching vertical of our business is all around stress relief, burnout, and overwhelm, and obviously helping people to relieve that unhealthy stress. Because some stress is good for us, right? But what we were doing with that work, and what we still do with this work to this day with our team of coaches, is we are working with senior leaders who then say to us, can you come and do this for our team? Can you come and do this for our organization? So it's coming in at that top level again. And it takes a lot to do that because it is an investment in your own personal development, right? Not necessarily just coaching, but the ego that has to be put down to say, do you know what? Maybe I'm not as, hot as what I thought I was. Or I don't want to be seen to not know this as well. And I think it's improving over time.
I think it's the language, and if I come back to the language we speak about and the mindsets we have, when you take a learning mindset to everything, there's always something to be learned. You can always improve,
Yeah.
and you can always take something away. Then everything is an opportunity,
Mm.
and I think that's a key part to all of it. If you got that, if you have that mindset in as a senior leader, you're always looking to absorb knowledge, always looking to work with somebody and listen to somebody and consistently progress, then I think you're always on the right track when it comes to that kind of angle.
100%. So if there's, based on your experiences as an executive coach, what would you say to the executives that are listening to this in terms of where do they begin when they could be in a place like I've just described, where actually you almost don't want to admit that you don't know where to start, or even that you might be experiencing personal struggles?
Normally, if I'm speaking to somebody, there's potentially like that, because I work with these coaches, I work as a coach one-to-one. So I believe that they will have that open conversation. To get the most out of it, you have to be reflective and you have to be open.
Yep.
What would my advice be? Just take a really deep dive into your own kind of values and where you're going, get in that direction, to see how actually you can make those steps and take those steps forward.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can really kind of understand what the issues are, what the challenges are,
Yeah.
and kind of overcome it in that direction. I think if that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. What if somebody's on the fence though? What if they've got to this far into the podcast and they're like, yeah, this does kind of make sense, but I'm still not sold on taking action yet? What do you say as a performance coach that is all about, driving that bit extra, perhaps compared to the average person? What do you say to them?
Oh, that's a very good question, especially if they're aimed around performance and they're wanting to work with a coach. Is this what you're asking me?
They're on the fence about
They're on the fence.
leaning into this and admitting that perhaps there's some things that they need to understand, either for their workplace or for themselves personally.
And that's a good question. And the reason why I say that, and I think I said that to every question you've had, but because everybody's so different, everybody's going to have their own challenge. And to say this is going to be the thing that is going to help you overcome that challenge.
Yeah,
it could be a personal well-being thing, and actually you're fighting burnout. You're actually, your energy levels are low because you're not eating the right food, you're not doing exercise, you're not sleeping well. It could be a clarity around direction. It could be the way your social connection is and the way your team are working. The thing that I would say to anybody is, without the conversation, without somebody there to challenge you and help you think about what you're trying to achieve, then you're not going to make those decisions based on an actual thing. We know, and this is where I think coaching comes into it for motivation and clarity and being their best version of themselves, because it's challenging for that person. You don't, to be a good coach, you have to not advise somebody to do anything.
Yeah.
Right. You have to get them to think about what they need to do and use examples of what they've seen before and what they've done before to create that perfection, to create that excellence, to create that success.
So as a coach, what one question could you ask somebody that's listening to this for them to at least start scratching the surface or to peel the onion? And I'm pinning you down here.
Yeah, you're really leading me into something, aren't you? Be reflective. Ask a reflective question. What's the real thing? What's the real thing getting in the way? What is it? What's the barrier? What's the biggest challenge stopping you or your team from succeeding?
Yeah.
That's probably my one question. What is the biggest barrier? What's the biggest block stopping you from succeeding?
Nice. Cool. I think it's good, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, leaders are good at seeing problems and looking for solutions, right? That's why they're leading, which is great. I think another thing I would add to that, it's not necessarily a coaching question. I guess it's just, when I think high performers, I think of people that want to go that extra, right? It's almost like I dare you. Whatever it is, whatever that resistance is to leaning into improved well-being in the workplace or for yourself personally, it's like I dare you to see what else you're capable of, and kind of just see what happens.
Yeah. There's always something we can improve on, right? There's always something we can learn. There's always something we can do better. both from an individual standpoint and also from a team standpoint. There's always some way we can connect better with our employee, or a challenge that you've got with an employee. There's always a direction or an issue that can be worked on, I think.
Yeah.
And so there's always something which you can put your focus towards being better at. And that's what I think high performance is, or high performers do really well, is trying to understand. And high performers know their strengths. So if you look at Richard Branson, for example, he knew his strengths. If you look at these people who are highest performance, they're normally, and this is where I think neurodiversity comes into it within its own, is that people with neurodiversity understand what their strengths are at a certain point. And they go, it takes a little while, and it took me a little while to understand what my strengths were, but you understand what those strengths are, and then you go, I'm going to lean into those really hard. But I know what my weaknesses are, and if I can continuously keep working on those a little bit, but keep working to my strengths, then they then go off and succeed. And I think that helps massively to consistently trying to improve yourself and others around you.
100%. And I think we've seen here, particularly in the UAE, the rise of the strengths coach and strengths-based coaching, and it is great. It is really great, and I think it should be a staple part of every, not just every organization, but I think education as well, especially when you get to like university and things like that. I think it's something really important to be aware of. There's another thing that high performers are really good at, and you can tell me from your perspective if you've seen this too, and that is being hard on themselves. And like kicking themselves even when they're smashing it and they're doing amazing things, but they don't recognize the amazing things that they are achieving. Do you see that?
Yeah, you do see that. People with a lack of confidence in themselves, and something which I deal with a lot, especially around imposter syndrome, and that, as you said, lack of confidence within their achievements. And I would say, it's a consistent battle. But reflection is a fantastic piece there, and even speaking to others will really help.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where it's so important to get to that root cause again of what's going on there, right? Because often leaders, high performers, there's actually a level of confidence but low self-esteem, right? So they can show up and they're like, well, I can speak in front of loads of people, they know they're competent at their jobs, but actually, like you said, there's something else going on in there. Like, what is it? And that's where you start to look at things like imposter syndrome. And I think that's really important, because I think insecure leaders, they can be detrimental to business. I was one of them at one point in my career, for sure. And it's something that's common across the board, because we're all human, right? And it's okay. And I think that's just so important, because often in the talk of high performance, we can leave out some of these little gremlins that might be hiding in the shadows, and actually they're the things that keep people awake at night.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've got a question for you, because we're on this topic. When you were struggling, when you were that kind of leader, what did you do? How did you overcome that?
When I was at complete rock bottom?
That rock bottom / kind of lack of confidence within yourself.
Yeah, so I didn't know it was lack of confidence at the time at all. So I was in this period where I had the confidence, on the outside I was delivering, I was doing great things, but I wasn't aware enough of my own narrative and the my own quality of thinking to even know whether I was almost sabotaging myself with the way I was thinking, and that inner dialogue. And I think that's what then led my subconscious, what led me to this extreme point of emotion. So I just got to this point where I was so overwhelmed with emotion that I had to listen, I had to pay attention. I got to the point where I was emotionally eating. I was like just in tears. I remember the night of hitting rock bottom completely. I was literally on a ball on the floor, like shaking, trying to literally like soothe myself. Like, it was obviously really intense, but that was just pure emotion flooding over me, because there was such of a lack of awareness of that internal dialogue. If perhaps I was aware of what I was thinking and what I was feeling, could understand it, then maybe I would have known that I was lacking self-esteem and that I needed more social connection or whatever else I needed at that time. So for me, like, my first step from there was asking for help. It was, I'm going through something extreme right now, and I do not know why. I don't know how to even talk about this. And that was it for me. Literally that night I sent an email because I was too scared to make a phone call, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, to a therapist in Abu Dhabi, saying like, I need help, I need to speak to somebody. Unfortunately, she come back to me straight away, and I met her the very next day, and that was the start of me understanding that there's actually this voice in my head. You know, and we all have a voice in our heads, by the way, for anyone listening that maybe doesn't think they do, you know. And it was so bizarre to me, because like you, I'd always been like striver, achieving, trying to do more, achieve more through sports, through exercise, through my career, like so many things, and I genuinely did love it. But I didn't know my why. I didn't know who I was. And that's something you spoke about at the very beginning of this conversation. You know, you didn't say the word authenticity, but you was like, how can a whole person show up at work? Well, first, even if the organization is perfect, the person needs to know who their whole self is, or at least have an idea of how to start to figure that out. And for me, I didn't have that. I didn't learn any of that stuff.
I think you have to be very thoughtful on that. I've met lots of young people and old people who don't think about it.
Yep.
And I was probably very similar until I started my business.
Yep.
And the career coincided with Ian completing suicide. I probably didn't reflect and think about where I was going. What did I want to achieve? Who am I? What are my values?
Yep.
And they change, right? Like, it's good to reflect. Like I do every year, I have a plan in which I kind of answer these questions and think about it a bit more deeply, to get the like to go, actually, this is where I'm going. This is why I am. This is who I am.
Yep.
This is what I want my life to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I want people to say about me. And so that really drives my sense of purpose, my sense of being. And I think some people don't do.
Yeah. And I think we're getting better at that, I believe, with some of like the projects that are happening in schools right now. I don't think the whole curriculum has probably changed to support the level of well-being and what we need to understand about ourselves just quite yet, but I think we're moving in that direction slowly but surely, because there's some fantastic work that's happening out there, because it does all start in those earlier years, right? Our conditioning. And for me, like, I just got to the point where I'd actually been through a lot growing up, and I was holding on to a lot of unresolved emotion that I didn't really know, because when I was younger, I didn't know how to process emotions. I didn't know how to say how I felt, because there was a gap in my own kind of education, right? Whether that be parental or in the school system, it just wasn't there. So it was something that I had to learn for myself. And unfortunately, I learned it the hard way, because I wasn't exposed to anything else. I mean, even, you know, from being in like that fitness space, even you go through all of the education, it's exercise, it's nutrition, it's exercise, it's nutrition at any point, and a bit of goal setting, obviously. But other than that, that was it. It's basically like they're your tools. That's what gets you from A to B, and off you go. Boom. And I entered this space when I was 16. You know, so it's like, what other opportunity did I have to learn this stuff, unless I was exposed to it through the second place where I was spending most of my time, which is the workplace.
Yeah, there is so much we aren't being taught. I think it's obviously got better, but when we were at school, we weren't being taught that. And I think now they get taught it, but the pressure that they're under to succeed on young people, it's, even with the well-being piece in there, I'm not sure if it's being taught correctly. The important parts are being taught correctly, but yeah, it's every generation's got a different challenge. I read a really good book by the founder of positive psychology, Martin Sligman, or Authentic Happiness. He talks around a lot of our internal beliefs happen before the age of 7, because it's the languages and the narrative we get taught by our parents that then creates this belief system.
Exactly.
Which I think is really interesting. I actually think now when I look at being a parent at some point, then I'm going to be questioning, am I doing everything correctly? Am I using the right language? But it's the same as what we should be doing to ourselves and as a team and like a leader. And this is why I think being a leader is really hard, is because you actually have to really think about the conversations you have with your team and the language you use.
Exactly. And I agree with that completely. Essentially, like we all have like that we are a sponge, right? 0 to 7, we are a sponge. We're soaking things up. Then we move into our socialization period, right? Which is where we're in those kind of teen years and we are learning from our friends. It's when you start to wear certain makeup or listen to certain music just because your mates are, and then we move into, the workplace and we're modeling, right? We're modeling all of the time. And we have to be very, very careful with that because there's so many chapters that have gone before that have seeded these ideas, these beliefs, the way that we think, the way that we speak. And we don't understand, I think, sometimes our own power, for good or for bad. And I think that's where the opportunity is for leaders, is to just continue to stay on their own journey and their own understanding of themselves, because that will naturally then project out into their teams. And there's so many ways you can do that. It can be through executive coaching. It's been going for a retreat somewhere. It could be you just take in 10 minutes every day to journal a little bit and just ask yourself some key questions. And I think sometimes life gets busy, right? And therefore those things slide. And we also, perhaps like you said, we don't think about it until we have to. But when we get to that point, let's actually do that rather than brush it under the carpet and let it all stack up that little bit more.
Yeah, it's such a reoccurring thing for me to do. Is to reflect.
Yep.
I do it every year for the year. I do it every quarter for the quarter. I do it every month for the month, and I do it every week for the week.
Yep.
It's like, what does this week look like? What have we done? What have we achieved? Where are we going? What can be improved?
Yep.
It's the easiest. It takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes every week. Every quarter it takes a bit longer.
Yep.
But that hour or 2 hours you spend, you can do it with people. You can do it by yourself.
Yep.
It gives you a real deep opportunity to give yourself some clarity, understand what you really need to do to improve yourself.
Yep, definitely. And what do you need to honor within yourself that already exists? Because I think there's so much talk around how can we be better, which sometimes can imply that, maybe we're not enough as we are. And I think that's a big problem for high performers. And that's where imposter syndrome comes into play as well for a lot of people. So I think it's just really important to have both of those dialogues going on in parallel. It's like, how can I be even better? Right? Like just that little shift in language is just that, oh yeah, so I'm already doing good. So what's the next thing? And then it's just such a small thing, but it can make the world of difference, for when perhaps those doubts creep in, and when we get busy, when we get tired, that's when that little voice starts to creep in even more, doesn't it?
100%.
Richard, we could spend probably the next few hours talking about this for sure. Before we let our listeners know where they can obviously come and find you and check out your own LinkedIn lives and your wellbeing chats, let us know, what else do you want to add to the conversation? What are your final thoughts?
I think we've covered a lot of my own personal beliefs in regards to this. That well-being is it's two parts, or well-being at work is two parts. It's personal well-being. People have to take responsibility for their own personal. You use the term wellness. I use the term personal well-being because it's the behaviors and mindsets as well. And then also companies and leaders and organizations need to understand their impact, and to use and understand what performance and sustained performance is to create that within an organization. And just reflecting on what we've spoken about, using data, understanding self-reflection on goals, on who we are, what we're trying to achieve. All those kind of bits are super important. And so, yeah, I think it's just that recognition of those really important parts of this conversation,
yep,
which I think brings the value to people.
Yep. Amazing. Thank you so much. That was a nice summary as well of some of the things that we've touched upon. So, Richard, where can our listeners come and find you and follow your work?
So the place where I hang out the majority of the time is LinkedIn. I'm on there trying to share information every day, or Monday to Friday anyway. So yeah, on there is Richard Turner. I run a LinkedIn Live where I get people like yourself, other professionals, people within organization who share knowledge, experience, advice on how to improve an area of something, whether that might be personal well-being or organizational well-being. or you can email me at richard@employeeshealth.co.uk.
Amazing. All of those links will be in the show notes as well. And I highly recommend anybody listening to go and check out the LinkedIn Lives. I think you've got some great guests on there. And what I love about it is the different perspectives that you bring to the conversation as well. And that's what this is all about, is how can we open our perspective when it comes to well-being that's going to actually serve the greater good, get to the root cause and create lasting change. So thank you so much. I've got one last question for you, which is your goal that you are supporting. So for any of our new listeners that might not be aware, that we actually make a donation on behalf of our guest towards one of the UN 2030 global goals, and Richard has chosen global goal 3, which is good health and well-being. Why is this so important to you? I kind of think we've answered this throughout the conversation. Yeah. Tell us, give us a snippet. Why is this one so important?
Why is this so important? Good health and well-being leads to long, happy life, and I don't think I need to explain anymore, right? If you're looking after your well-being, looking after your health, we live once. This is why I always try to say to people, and I start my coaching introduction to this: we live once. It doesn't happen twice. It happens really quickly, and so if you can make it a little bit longer by looking after your health and putting some behaviors in, which sometimes could be hard, but you get really positive output from it. Then why would you not want to do it in the best way possible? And that's for me the ultimate goal of all of this.
Yep.
To live the one short period of time we're on this earth in the best way we can, happy and healthy, with people we love, doing the things we love. That for me is what I'm trying to achieve as much as I can. And I'm also trying to help everybody else understand how they can achieve that too.
I love that. Amazing. Listen, we appreciate the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you so much for your time today. And our listeners will no doubt come and give you a follow. We'll see you next time. Thank you ever so much for asking me to be on here. And I really appreciate the questions and the support and all that love. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Then share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.